Unsung Murder Ballads discusses topics of a disturbing nature.
And we're not going to hold back on the graphic details and disturbing content.
So we do not recommend our podcast for children under the age of 13.
And while we respect the victims and their families involved in these tragic cases,
we're also going to be critical of mistakes that are made during the investigations.
And we're going to use dark humor to express ourselves now and then.
So with that said, this podcast may not be for everyone.
And that's okay. We're glad you're here checking us out.
And if you've made it this far, welcome to the Unsung Murder Ballads family. And follow us on Instagram at Unsung Murder Ballads if you want to talk to us.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Unsung Murder Ballads. This is episode 102. I am Janus Dead.
I'm Jameson Dead.
And I'm Joyous Dead.
All right, so we are back for part 2 of our Stephen Avery case, which is, the For Joyous's information. And just to recap, last week we talked about the Making a Murderer. We basically covered Stephen Avery's wrongful conviction, his release, the things that happened during his release, as well as his arrest for the murder of Teresa Halbach. And we kind of ended right before right before the murder. But we did talk about Making a Murderer and how it would be his nephew, Brandon Dassey's confession that basically brought it together for police and how all that was presented for Making a Murderer. Do you remember all that?
How much they left out.
Yes.
That was the most significant part, was just how much they left out intentionally.
Yes, because
I have to assume intentionally.
One would have to, because they're the creators of that film or that series.
Right, so if you're fucking it up.
Yeah, you either miss something and you're just you really weren't paying attention, or you left it out intentionally.
Right. But you're just a bad documentarian.
Exactly. And this next part, some of the stuff we're going to cover here, is actually going to show just how intentional it all was.
All right. Well.
Yes.
Let's rock.
So, jumping back in, the biggest thing to remember is the victim in all this, and that is Teresa Halbach. So, we're going to talk about her life for a little bit, and then we're going to dive back into the entire case involving her and Stephen Avery. So, Teresa Halbach was born on March 22nd, 1980. She had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. She was raised on her family's dairy farm in rural Calumet County, Wisconsin, and she graduated from Hilbert High School and headed off to the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. So she was an honor student at Green Bay, earning her degree in photography in 2002. Teresa was an infectiously fun person and a gifted photographer. There was every indication that she loved everyone in her life and was gregarious and the life of the party.
Ugh.
I know. It always sucks when it's the good, nice people that are the victims.
And it always is.
It always is. It sucks.
The assholes live forever.
Well, most of them, unfortunately. She also enjoyed singing karaoke, and her favorite song to sing, according to her ex-boyfriend Ryan, was Picture by Sheryl Crow and Kid Rock.
Solid song.
It's a good song. I mean, it's very similar to that Lady Antebellum or whatever they're calling themselves now.
Need You Now.
Need You Now. Very similar song. She traveled extensively. She visited Mexico and Spain and went scuba diving off the coast of Australia's Great Barrier Reef.
Dang, she was
That sounds
cool.
awesome.
I know, she sounds like an awesome person to hang out with. Other parents often asked Teresa to take their children's pictures, with some of them even joking that job must have been a form of birth control for her. Makes sense. When you got rowdy kids, you learn you don't want kids.
Absolutely. That's a good way to learn.
Teresa, however, denied that, saying that it was just the opposite for her. According to friends, she wanted to be a mother one day, and she took care of the people around her. Her former teacher, Stan Diedrich, said, "She really cared about people. I think that's what really stood out. And she was always going to be that person to be there to help. She was just very outgoing, and she was always happy."
Ugh.
Yeah, it sucks. And when you tell this story, and I got to be honest, most of what I just said isn't even touched on in Making a Murderer.
Of course not. Why would they?
So Teresa wanted to start her own photography business, but in the meantime, she took work for Auto Trader magazine. Now, for those who don't know, Auto Trader was huge before the internet in particular. It was the best way to find cars, to actually see photos of them for sale by owners and smaller businesses at that time.
Oh, that's how y'all did it. I love a little peek into the old times.
I remember I used to work at a convenience store, and I would do the overnight shifts. So there was a whole stretches of time where I had nothing to do, and I would literally flip through Auto Trader to look at the different cars that were for sale.
That was always fun, especially when you had no money and you were just kind of, living in Fantasyland and
Right.
picturing yourself driving these really nice things.
Exactly.
Oh my God, that's just like me now with like 17 tabs open on my browser filling carts that I'm never going to purchase.
Which, the reason I don't do that is because I'm afraid I'll accidentally hit like fucking send and end up buying shit.
Well, yeah. You're also a bit more impulsive than I am, perhaps.
You know what? That's perhaps is very, yes, definitely.
Perhaps is generous.
Yes. So Teresa was working a single day a week initially on Mondays to cover the area that she was assigned, which included Manitowoc County. Now, Teresa had been to the Avery property numerous times before her disappearance. And here's how Making a Murderer presents these events. On Halloween of 2005, Teresa called the Avery salvage yard to inform them that she could go to the property to take some photos. She would be reported missing on November 3rd, and then the investigators made it publicly known that they were trying to locate her car, which was a 1999 dark green Toyota RAV4. Avery's property being her last listed stop obviously created one hell of a story for reporters who could...
Oh, hell yeah, I'm sure it did.
Yeah, they could not stop discussing it. It was clear that she had made 3 stops and she was supposed to make that day. And after her visit to Avery's, that's when her cell phone usage had stopped.
Quite obvious.
She then made no more credit card purchases after that. And obviously the search parties began at her last known location, which was the Avery property. These searches went on for many days, both near and away from the Avery property. And among the searchers were Teresa's family members, as well as her ex-boyfriend, Ryan Hillegas. So here are some further details that Convicting a Murderer breaks down for their viewers. And this blows my mind that Making a Murderer didn't include most of this. The first time Teresa went to Avery salvage yard was on June 20th, 2005, roughly 4 months before her murder. A couple of months later, on August 15th, Jody, Stephen Avery's second wife, ends up going to jail for an operating under the influence charge.
Oof.
After this, Stephen Avery began calling numerous times to have Teresa come out to the salvage yard to take photos of the vehicles that they were selling there. Literally the Monday after Jody goes to jail, August 22nd, Avery has Teresa come out to the property for her second visit to take photos.
Yeah, that's weird to do that right after your wife goes to jail.
It's really weird. Everything about this is sus and not discussed in Making a Murderer. The third appointment would be the following Monday on August 29th, but the fourth appointment would actually be quite different. So that happened on September 19th, and Avery had set it up under a different account. He used the name Tom Yanda, which was his sister Barbara's husband at the time. So Teresa arrived, she took photos of Tom's car that was for sale, but then Stephen Avery approached her and asked her to take some photos of one of his vehicles.
And she's like, okay, dude.
Yeah, well,
I made another appointment.
Well, there's a thing they can do, and we're going to discuss it in a little bit. And we'll discuss it now. It's actually called a hustle shot. So you can call the photographer for Auto Trader directly and pay them to take photos, and they still submit it to Auto Trader, but it's a way for them to make extra money on the side. Like there's like less of a middleman.
Yeah.
So that's what basically he'd set up like in real time. Another important side note here is that on October 9th, Avery and his sister Barbara went to an adult store, and Avery bought some leg irons and handcuffs there.
Wow. That's quite the
With
perk.
his sister?
Isn't that weird, right?
Wow, I hate this guy.
I'm not the only one that thought that was weird. Thank you.
No, you're not. Nope.
So Avery would later say that he bought those items for himself and Lori, his wife, but Lori's already in jail at this point.
Yeah, I hate to break it to him, but she already has a pair of handcuffs. She's actually quite got that under control. You don't need to buy
That's
them.
really funny. When pressed later as to when he bought those items, he would later claim, because they were found in his home after his arrest, he would later claim that he couldn't remember when he bought them.
Oh, bullshit.
I don't know about that.
So the next appointment with Teresa was on October 10th, and Avery called her directly to her cell phone to set up another hustle shot. So she's given him a direct line.
Gotcha. Probably she makes more money. He probably has to pay less money to the magazine.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Exactly.
Under the table.
Yeah, but that becomes dangerous when you're giving out personal information like that.
Yeah, I try never to use my cell phone for work-related things.
Mm-hmm.
So Teresa's friends, Wendy and Trinity, have stated that Teresa had told them that she was taking photos for Stephen Avery. Because remember, he's like a local celebrity at this time due to his release from the wrongful conviction. She also told them that she felt creeped out by Avery, and they stated that Teresa told them that Avery had answered his front door wearing only a towel.
Ew.
Okay, that's not okay.
Now, this was also corroborated by an Auto Trader worker that Teresa had also reported it to. So remember, the day that we're talking about here where she goes up is the day after he bought the handcuffs and leg irons. So according to Teresa's friends, Avery told her, while standing there in nothing but a towel, when she looked shocked or what have you, he said, "Don't worry, someday you'll get this." He also,
wow,
What the
what a
fuck?
narcissistic asshole.
Yeah, and he also allegedly made reference to a wall display behind him with pictures of women and phone numbers on it, stating that she too would one day end up on that wall.
Oh, what the fuck?
Fucking scumbag. Teresa told her friends that she did not want to return there. And of course, after Teresa went missing, her friends were never interviewed by police and certainly not interviewed by Making a Murderer. None of this would be allowed into evidence during Avery's trial because it was considered hearsay. One of the many things that supporters of Avery state that he had no motive to kill Teresa Halbach. Well, you have to ask yourself, did Bundy have a motive? Did Gacy have a motive? Fuck.
Well, exactly. And that's the thing. They don't all have motives. Some of these people are just kind of fucked.
Exactly.
Or it's something they'll never reveal or we'll never know.
Well, predators, especially sexual predators, really only act to serve themselves and feed a desire. Like, that's what they're doing. Their motives become irrelevant in those situations.
Exactly. And then often it's just a murder to not have any witnesses.
So there's actually an audio recording from one of Avery's prison phone calls with Jody, where she actually calls him out on his bullshit. She says, and I quote, "Why wouldn't you murder Teresa? Because she wouldn't fuck you. So you had to murder her because she turned your ass down." Unquote.
Ooh.
Oh, what a slap in the face.
Again, not on Making a Murderer.
Of course not.
Of course not, yeah.
So Brandon Dassey, during his interview, stated that Stephen Avery told him that he had, quote, "never gotten some of that stuff and was going to get some now," unquote. Obviously referring to Teresa.
Ew.
Brandon told police that Avery planned to take Teresa where no one would see him. His brother Earl stated that he believes Avery is guilty and that Avery killed Teresa because he thought he could get away with it.
It sounds like something he would do.
Absolutely. Avery also made statements to Jody that confirms this, and she quoted Avery stating that he believed, quote, "all bitches owed him." Yeah.
Yikes. Yikes.
Yeah, this logic only fits in the mind of a sociopath. One woman falsely identifies him, and he gets 18 years in prison, so therefore all women owe him. That's a sociopath.
Yerp.
Yep.
Oh my God.
And it also becomes more clear that when and if Teresa rejected him, he would snap because he also thinks he's untouchable.
Right, it makes sense.
So as we approach Halloween of 2005, Avery called this blows me away. The fact that this isn't in Making a Murderer pisses me off. He called his nephew Brian's girlfriend and invited her over for sex.
What?
Ew.
In reports, Avery is listed having said, quote, "Would you like to come over and have a little fun? We can have the bed hit the wall real hard," unquote.
Please told me she told him to go pound sand.
Yeah, she declined his ever so gracious offer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like any normal person would.
Right.
So at 8:12 a.m. on the 31st, Avery calls Auto Trader asking again, specifically for the photographer who had been there before, to come out. But this time he used the name B. Yanda, so Barbara, his sister. It was for her minivan, and Avery had offered to post it for her to sell. So she legitimately needs to sell a vehicle. So he's offering to take the task on for her. But when Avery gave a phone number to Auto Trader, it was Barbara's phone number.
Huh.
So I think the obvious thought here is that he did not want to contact Teresa directly using his phone or her phone number because he's planning something.
Right.
And if Teresa is creeped out by Avery, as her friends have stated, she obviously doesn't want to go out there, so he's forced to kind of work around that. So Teresa called the Yanda phone number at 11:43 a.m. and left a message that clearly showed that she had no idea that she would be meeting Avery again. Now, the message essentially said that she didn't know exactly where she was going and needed a call back. Now, to recap that, she has been to the Avery home 4 times in 5 weeks. So to not know where she was supposed to be going shows that she didn't know she was going to Stephen Avery's house.
Yes, for sure.
So Making a Murderer omits the part of the message where she states she doesn't have an address. Like literally it cuts. So in Making a Murderer, she says, "I can be there around 2. Thank you." Cutting out a portion in the middle where she says, "I can be there around 2, so give me a call back because I don't have the address. Thank you."
What the fuck? These people.
Yeah, 100% audience manipulation. But what the fuck? It's one thing to take a segment, but to cut out a middle part
Is nuts. It's nuts.
That's intent.
I'm
It is
hating
intent.
all of this.
It's fucked up. And I'm telling you, I know you, Joyous, I know you didn't watch this when it was airing, but it had the whole country in an uproar. Like
This is fucking crazy.
It blew my mind when I started learning this information, which is why we're discussing it the way we are now. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of hate, but you know what? Fuck you people, go do some more research.
Truly. I mean, I might have to do my own research because it sounds pretty like, I don't know, like of all the cases we discuss, this sounds pretty obvious.
Yeah, but when you watch, I would say, I mean, we talked about you possibly watching Making a Murderer first anyway before we did this, but like, I get it, time runs out on you. But like, if you go back and watch that, it's going to be hard for you to see it from the lens of the naive people before hearing this information.
Right. Like I kind of want to, I want to like go back and see them present their argument and see. And
it's intense. Their argument is intense. They did it very, very well. But
and if they convince lots of people, like they must have had something convincing.
Right. And now with the rebuttal Convicting a Murderer coming out, it blew the doors wide open. Anyone who watches the two back to back or together, you can't possibly deny it anymore.
Well, and that's the thing is you just have to convince one person, and then that one person convinces another person,
yeah,
and another person,
you're
and
forgetting
another person.
But you're forgetting what cults are like. Like people.
Well, no. But what I'm saying is the Making a Murderer, they left all that out because they felt like they had a strong enough like case that they could just go on based on that. And then when the Convicting a Murderer came out, that just shot everything to shit.
No, right. And there's even a part in Convicting a Murderer, and I don't know if I'm going to go into it within the rest of what we're doing, but they're on the phone with Stephen Avery, and they tell him at one point that what they're learning is not changing how they're making the documentary. So they've made these conscious decisions. So
it's fucking weird.
It is weird. And now people are spending all this money trying to prove he's innocent when he's most likely not. And,
very interesting.
And we still have a whole lot more to go.
Damn.
So at 2:27 p.m., Teresa calls the Auto Trader office and confirms that she will be going to the shoot, but that it was for the Avery Brothers salvage yard. So she knows where she's going at this point, But there's still no reason to believe that she actually thought she'd be seeing Stephen Avery, because there are other Avery brothers on the property and the rest of his family. And in my own experience in situations like that, where you hope not to bump into someone you don't like, she was probably hoping that she would be seeing those other family members and that she would be able to avoid Stephen.
Right.
And realistically, there's no reason to think that she would have thought her life was in danger. Because
No.
who would ever think? You know what I mean? You're just doing a
And
job.
she's been there a while, like a bunch of times for work too. Like it's probably less suspicious.
Exactly. So we're going to talk about Stephen Avery's timeline for that day. And once again, remember, this is not discussed in Making a Murderer, or at least most of it isn't. So Avery left the salvage yard that day around 11 a.m. without informing anyone that he was leaving. When asked by police later, Avery stated that his brothers Chuck and Earl were unaware that he was going and not going to be returning after lunch. When they asked him if that was normal for him to not return, he stated that it was not normal. Avery called Auto Trader to confirm that Teresa was coming out there, which they confirmed for him. He then made 2 phone calls to Teresa's personal phone using *67 to hide who was actually calling.
Oh,
this fucking creep.
And this is shown in the call history. Avery wouldn't make another call until 2 hours after he claimed Teresa had left. When he made that call to Teresa, this time he did not use the *67 option. Avery.
So you say he called again 2 hours after he said she left?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, Avery claimed that he called maybe 20 minutes after she left because he was hoping she would come back and take more photos of another vehicle. Now, the speculation here is that he was either trying to use this as an alibi of sorts to show that she had actually left, or that he could not find her phone after killing her or abducting her, and he called it to locate the phone so he could destroy it.
Yeah.
And then in his panic, he forgot to hit *67. Yeah.
Logical.
Now, once again, I like to say this because it pisses me off. Making a Murderer didn't cover any of that. So between 4:15 and 4:45 that evening, Earl's brother-in-law, Robert, arrived at the salvage yard and overheard part of a conversation between Stephen Avery and his brother Chuck. He said Chuck asked Avery if the photographer had arrived, and Avery said no. So on November 3rd, police had received the missing persons call. As police dug in, they learned that Teresa had 3 appointments that day, and 2 of them were in Manitowoc County, one with a family called the Zipperers, and the other one with the Averys. Investigator Mark Weigert contacted Sergeant Colburn and informed him that Teresa had an appointment at the Averys and asked Colburn to look into it. Now, Colburn knew the Averys as the police had contracted with the salvage yard, and he himself had been a customer there. So when he arrived at the property, Stephen Avery approached him and asked him why he was there. Colburn said that he was there to speak to either Chuck or Earl, but said that since Stephen was there, he would speak with him, and he informed them that he was looking into Teresa Halbach's disappearance, that she was missing. He asked if Teresa had been out there, and Stephen Avery said that she had been looking at his sister's car. Colburn asked Avery if Teresa said anything about where she was going, but Avery claimed that he had never spoken to her, that he had only seen her through the window from his home. Yeah, that's 2 different stories so far.
Yep.
So when Colburn called Weigert back, he was informed that Teresa had also stopped at the home of a family named Zipperer, and Colburn then went there with other officers. They confirmed that Teresa had been there and that she had left some documents for that family to decide if they wanted to post their vehicles in the magazine. So it was Lieutenant Lank who received a call from Weigert on November 4th requesting that the county police go back and re-interview Avery, as it seemed like that was the last place Teresa had been. Avery invited Lank and a detective named Remacher inside his trailer to speak with them. This time, Avery said that Teresa had come up to his door, had entered his home, and that's when he paid her. So now a third story.
Okay, entirely different fucking story again.
Exactly. So there is worth noting that Avery's nephew, Bobby Dassey, the brother of Brandon, had stated that he had seen Teresa at Avery's house to police. So this could be why Avery had to change his story again.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Bobby said that he saw Teresa take photos of the front of a vehicle and then walking towards Avery's trailer. And that when he was done with the shower and he was leaving to go hunting, he noticed that Teresa's car was still there. So on November 5th, Avery claimed that he had met Teresa outside. She had taken photos. He paid her, and then she left. So this version, I know, right? So,
I can't.
There's a lot of versions of this story.
Yeah.
Well, version 4.0 will basically remain consistent going forward with him. So he's finally got the story he needs, supposedly. Again, it should be noted that Making a Murderer does another edit to the call between police to make it seem like Avery was the only suspect at this point. On Making a Murderer, Remaker and Weigert are talking, and one of them says, "The boss wants us to go back and re-interview Avery again." However, the original unedited recording has him saying, "The boss wants us to go back and re-interview Avery and Zipperer again."
It's weird.
Yeah, and then the other part is crazy is the unedited recording actually has them continuing on saying that the Zipperers weren't going to be happy about being interviewed again. So they're even showing so they're even showing compassion for the fact that they know what they're about to piss off one of these people. So but yet Making a Murderer frames it as if the police are purposefully framing Stephen Avery to get rid of this lawsuit.
Right.
It's fucking weird.
It's wild that they're allowed to leave so much out. Like there should be a point where you're required to put stuff in there.
Well, according to the filmmakers, because they have been asked these questions, they say anything that was cut for time. And they
that's a load of shit.
That's convenient.
And they would, the filmmakers themselves often threw it back at Netflix, saying that they were the ones doing the final edits and they were the ones imposing this. But Netflix fired back and said, no, they weren't the filmmakers. That was them. So neither group take responsibility for what was on the cutting room floor.
Damn.
Yeah, it's crazy. So Earl, his brother, stated that he saw a vehicle that Avery was working on, like repairing, that was in the garage previously, but had been removed from the garage after Teresa's disappearance. And Earl thought that was odd, because if you're working on a vehicle, why would you take it out of the garage?
Yeah, that would be really weird to do.
Now, Brandon told police that he helped Avery move the vehicle back into the garage later. And Brandon also told people that Teresa's RAV4 was in the garage before they had to move the other vehicle back in. So the obvious conclusion here is that Avery hid her car in his garage before moving it to where it would later be found.
Yeah.
As investigators began their search of the salvage yard, they were faced with a massive area that they had to go over. This property is 40 acres large and had over 4,000 vehicles on it.
Holy shit.
Yeah, I'm not kidding.
That's insane.
I'm not kidding. When you look at it, you can see an aerial view when you go, if you did a search. It looks like an event parking lot. Like if you're at like a stadium.
Yeah, that's wild. That's a lot of fucking cars.
So on September 5th, that was the day that they would find her vehicle on the property. And it was found by Teresa's cousin, Pam Sturm, she's the one who found it and called it in. She was instructed at the time to stay where she was and to not touch anything or enter the vehicle. Pam stated that she and the people that she was with entered the property around 10:10 a.m., and by 10:25 they found the vehicle. So 15 minutes of looking. Many people criticize this because it seems like too short a time to be on such a big property to have immediately found the vehicle. Now,
what are they trying to say, though?
Comment. Right.
Hold on, because this is how it's presented by Making a Murderer. So we'll get to it. During court, Pam stated that she found the RAV4 because God showed her the way.
Oh, wow.
Which, of course, immediately made people suspicious of her claims and thinking that she had prior knowledge of its location.
Yeah, no kidding.
Most truthers believe that Pam was manipulated by police to find the RAV4. And Making a Murderer interviews people has interviews with people claiming that she went directly to the car to create a sense of doubt. Now, yeah, it's crazy, but convicting a murderer, and we're seeing constantly, goes a bit further. They showed testimony by others that, when you see it, kind of clears up a lot of questions. Avery's brother, Earl, gave Pam permission to look around the property, and he pointed to her to the spot where she could enter the yard, which happened to be the entrance closest to where the RAV4 was. Now, Pam goes along this one path, and she's checking the cars along the road with her companion, and they noticed that there was a ridge on the far side, like along the edge of where they were. There was a ridge that had cars lined up on the ridge. So they decided to just go over there and look there. It's almost a straight line from the entrance she was told to use. So there's really nothing out of the ordinary. It was on that ridge that they located the RAV4.
Right, so they were kind of pointed right at it.
Exactly. So now the funny thing is that car was put where it was. You to have gotten to that point, you would have had to have been familiar with the salvage yard. So if you're a person trying to put the car there to frame Stephen Avery, you would have had to have known the layout very well.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. Now the RAV4 was haphazardly covered with branches and debris and the hood of another car to help conceal it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. In a police interview, Brandon Dassey told police that he and Avery had brought the car there and covered it. Now, some people argue that using that kind of debris to cover it the way it was done to frame Stephen Avery because no other vehicle in that area was covered with anything. Therefore, it caused it to stand out. However, if you look at the images of the other cars on that ridge around Teresa's RAV4, they're all older. Their paint is rusty, and they've clearly been there for some time. So this brand new shiny car stood out regardless.
Right.
So by not covering it with debris, you were going to notice it anyway.
Right. It's quite obvious.
Yeah. So it should also be noted that the license plate for Teresa's car were found curled up like a newspaper in the back seat of another vehicle closer to Stephen Avery's home. So
weird.
Right? So if police were trying to frame Avery, why would they even bother removing the license plate, let alone hide them inside another vehicle?
Right.
That sounds to me like someone who took them off himself, was trying to think of what to do to destroy them, curled them up as much as he could, and threw them in another junker car thinking no one was ever going to look there.
Right.
I was just going to say that's pretty impressive that they were able to curl them like newspapers.
You know what? Yeah, I mean, I don't know how tight it really was, but that's how it was described in the documentary. Cadaver dogs were brought onto the property during the search, and a cadaver dog did alert on Teresa's RAV4 when the dogs were brought in. But at this point, since there was no body, police were still treating it like a missing persons case. Avery stated that if he had done it, he would have used the car crusher on the property to dispose of the RAV4. And in fact, to get to where the car was, you had to drive past said crusher. However, to drive directly to the crusher, you would have had to have gone right past Avery's brother's home and likely been seen driving in. So while you can take other routes to get to where the RAV4 was, and that's most likely what had happened, that he brought it over there. But keep in mind, this crusher's loud as fuck. So you're not just going to go and use it and think no one's going to notice you're using it. So it's much more likely that Stephen Avery parked the car as close as he could to the crusher, hid it so that no one would see it until he had the opportunity to use the crusher to destroy it. And
yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And when you typically crush a car, you have to remove the tires, the gas tank, the radiator. You have to drain all the fluids and because shit's going to get messy.
Right. That makes sense. You'd have to deconstruct it a little bit.
Right. So if he goes in there and just crushes a car, anyone who looked at that crusher is going to know something's off. Realistically, it looks like his plan all along was to crush that car. And Brandon did tell police that Avery told him he was going to crush the car before anyone noticed. So that's another thing. And we're going to discuss Brandon Dassey's interview with police in part 3 because that is so imperative, like that's such a big moment that it needs a lot of time, and we're not going to do that tonight. So Avery was interviewed by a reporter where she asked him who he thinks might have done something to Teresa. And Avery says, quote, "I got no idea. If the county did something or whatever and trying to plant evidence on me or something, I don't know," unquote. Like, how stupid of an answer is that?
Right.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
And even myself, when the first time I watched that documentary, my first thought was that he was pre-framing his defense. You know, getting it out there ahead of time.
Yep. So it will be like in the narrative.
Yep. So investigators from outside the sheriff's office were brought in to oversee the investigation of Avery's property to try to mitigate any accusations of misconduct. County officers were allowed to help in the investigation, which will later create some issues. Making a murder.
Oh.
Yeah, right? I mean, well, we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but you got to understand that this is a small town. So those like local sheriff's office, those people don't have any training, and there's not a lot of them. And this, even the county coming in, they don't have a lot of people. So they kind of need the help.
Yeah.
So Making a Murderer states that the Averys were not allowed on their property for 8 days while the police conducted their investigation. Avery obviously takes the time to state that anyone could have planted anything during that time.
Right.
So after Teresa's car was located, there were 2 police forces working the area. Calumet County, where Teresa had been reported missing, and Manitowoc County, where her car was found. And with the lawsuit being active, it was decided that the lead investigators would be Calumet County and that Manitowoc's involvement would be limited. Making a Murderer presents it in a way that Manitowoc County's sheriff's office shouldn't have been there at all, and that they were being secretive about them being there. When in fact, if you go back and watch the press conference from that time period, the police were very open about the fact that Manitowoc County was there and investigating right from the beginning. News reporters publicly stated that Manitowoc officers suggested that they be accompanied by others whenever they were on the property to ensure that there were no such concerns.
That's a good thing to do.
Many truthers try to claim that it's suspicious that in so many aspects of the investigations, the same officers' names keep reappearing. As I was just stating, they forget that these are small town police forces. So they don't have that many trained officers. So of course you're going to see the same person's name appear on these reports because there's only like 8 of them making the reports.
Right. Like that makes sense, especially if it's like you have a team on a certain case. How many are you expecting?
Right. And how many of them are trained in any given area?
Yeah.
So police chose to start their search at Avery's trailer, which only makes sense. And that initial search was minor, as they were just looking for Teresa, and they were not tearing the place apart as if they were looking for, say, stash drugs or something. Police took the handcuffs and the leg irons, thinking maybe Teresa's DNA could have been on those, and they finish their search and they leave. Later, another team was sent in to do a more thorough search. Making a Murderer and Avery's defense team really targeted Lieutenant Lenk and Sergeant Colburn as the villains against Stephen Avery. Interestingly, though, neither of these men had anything to do with Avery's lawsuit. So
Interesting.
So their argument that they're trying to frame him for this $36 million, but they're blaming 2 guys whose names aren't even on the list.
Right. Although, cops
Yes,
protecting cops.
That's true. There is a blue line. You're right.
Right. Exactly. And we got a fair skepticism there.
No, I agree with you. I should have seen that coming. The basic truth of it is that Manitowoc police were needed by the investigators in this case. Brandon Dassey stated in his police interview that while the family was on their property north of where they lived, and while police were searching their yard, that Stephen Avery was acting like he needed to flee and get away from police. Avery is on Making a Murderer saying that if he had killed Teresa, he would have run. But according to statements made by Brandon, Avery's father had to talk him out of running. So at this point during the search, a cadaver dog alerted on burn barrows near Barbara's house, and they were secured. Now, Barbara's his sister. They all live like on this big stretch of property.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the burn barrels are a big part of the actual investigation. Avery denied using his own burn barrels for the 2 weeks prior to Teresa's disappearance, yet his family stated that they could smell him burning plastics the day she went missing.
His family's really not on his side.
They're really not. They're very
not
honest.
at all.
Yeah, they're honest people, which is good. Making a Murderer leaves out the fact that Avery had burned Teresa's personal items and that police found parts of those items in his burn barrel. And we're talking about like her camera and her cell phone. They found pieces of those in the burn barrel.
Well, so much for not using it.
Exactly. His whole story is full of fucking holes.
Holes, yeah.
Yeah.
Avery never gave answers that were satisfactory to when the last time he had used the burn pit and the barrels in his backyard actually was. When police found human bone fragments that had been burned and cremated in Avery's fire pit, he denied having a fire at all that entire week. Like that
What
she
the
went
fuck?
missing.
What?
They found
How do you
human
deny
bone
that?
fragments?
Yes, they found human bone fragments in his burn pit.
So what? Somebody dragged him over there and just planted him?
Don't you remember Making a Murderer? He claims he does claim that, yes. However, Avery spoke with his sister Barbara on a recorded call from the jail, and she tells him that she saw him burning something on Monday, October 31st, the day that Teresa went missing. Suddenly, Avery's memory of the event is crystal clear when he later tells investigators that he remembers this. And he said that he and Brandon were there and that they were burning brush and tires.
And human bone.
He doesn't mention the human bones. So keep in mind now, at this point, police wouldn't learn that Brandon was there at the fire until Brandon tells them that 4 months later. Once police focus on the fire and they begin to ask more pressing questions regarding that, other Avery family members make statements that, yes, they had seen a fire. Earl's wife, Candy, said the fire was so big she wondered how Stephen Avery wasn't burning down his entire trailer. Truthers look at this and believe that police had either pressured the family or had brainwashed them. Yeah. The Avery family is not the brainwashed people here.
Wow, that's just ridiculous.
So the night of the 31st, when the fire was happening, Avery claimed to police during an interview that he was in bed watching porn.
Well, plausible.
However, during a call with Jody at her prison cell, or her prison, at 9 p.m., Avery is obviously not in the home, as at one point he exclaims out loud, "Where the fuck is my soda? Oh, by the golf cart." So, yeah, he's obviously not in his bed watching porn. At least I hope not. The fucking golf cart. He also said that he also told her that he was out there cleaning up the yard. So what is clear, at least to me, is that Avery has trouble remembering anything that makes him look bad until someone else points out the truth to him, and then he remembers it in a way that fits his narrative.
Selective memory.
That is what it would appear.
So Brandon stated that he left the fire around 9:30 and Avery stayed. Other witnesses from the family stated they saw Avery out there as late as 11:30 at the fireside. Interestingly, when police were searching the property, Avery's dog was left chained to its doghouse, which was near the burn pit, and the dog, being quite aggressive, kept people away from the pit while it was out there. So imagine trying to do like just a thorough search, and there's this fucking aggressive dog keeping you away from a whole section. Which to me states that dog was put there for a reason.
Exactly. Yep. Trying to hide something.
Police testified in court that the dog was mean and not letting anyone near the area, and that they should have removed the dog, but they didn't at that time.
I don't know why. You should have gone above and beyond to get rid of that.
You would think so, but at the same time, maybe they just didn't understand the importance, the weight of that area. You know, it is just a burn pit, but once you found bone fragments, you should have been looking everywhere.
Yeah.
So truthers believe the bones were planted because Making a Murderer didn't report about Avery's dog keeping the police away from that burn pit. Sarah Fosk was a dog handler, and her dog, a bloodhound, was trained for tracking people and only people. She requested scent articles from the Halbach family so she could search the salvage yard. Sarah, the dog handler, stated that she feels the most important area she and her dog traveled was called Track 6. This is the track that went from the garage door where the dog signaled and then around the burn pit, but obviously Avery's dog kept them away from that. Her dog then followed Teresa's scent to one of the doors of Avery's trailer, then back to the burn pit again. The scent dog led Sarah down a road to a nearby quarry. The dog kept going back and forth in front of a berm, and Sarah simply said, "I don't know how to tell you this, but she's here."
Oh.
She believed that the ashes of Teresa essentially moved through the area of bushes on the berm and settled there and in the nearby pond. And the dog began moving back to the property, right to where Avery's dog was again. So basically this
Dogs
dog
can smell someone's scent on their ashes?
It's crazy. Or at least like the smell of her as everything's burning through the air and it's getting caught, the particulates or whatever, the particles
That's
are getting
wild.
caught. Fucking crazy. But yeah, she's convinced that that's what the dog was smelling. Then, after that, her dog leads her into the salvage yard and ends up right where Teresa's vehicle had been. Making a murderer.
That's suspicious.
So suspicious. It's ridiculous. And I'll tell you, dogs impress the fuck out of me. Like, their ability to do things blow me away. Do you know that?
Oh, it's incredible.
Do you know that some Vegas hotels have dogs that can sniff bed bugs?
That's cool.
Wow.
Yeah, the Wynn Resort and Hotel has a dog that they bring it through 30 random rooms a day, and it can smell bed bugs.
That's wild.
It blows me away. Dogs are amazing. So Making a Murderer never addresses how scent dogs moved or where they alerted. This matches Brandon's account of how he and Avery moved Teresa's body. So what this dog found matched exactly what Brandon would later claim. Sarah stressed to investigators that they needed to remove Avery's dog so that she could search that area. Brandon's sketch of where they burned Teresa showed exactly where they found the bone fragments. And I know we haven't really touched on Brandon's, talking to police yet, but we will, trust me. Once Avery's dog was removed from the area, forensic experts started to sift through it. Anything they thought were or could be bones or evidence were put into a box, and the rest was sifted literally over a tarp, and that tarp was also kept. Police then covered the scene and would wait for the results from what they found. If they had Teresa's remains, they would return and do a more thorough excavation. They were not 100% sure at this point that they had human remains at that time. Keep in mind, this is like, it's Wisconsin. There's a lot of hunting. It could be deer bones. They don't know what they have at this point. Dr. Leslie Eisenberg, a forensic anthropologist, determined that the bones belonged to a human adult female approximately 30 years of age. She was able to literally determine where each bone fragment belonged in the human body and even arrange them for photos for the trial.
Wow.
That's impressive.
People who are good at their jobs blow me the fuck away, I'm telling you. She said she found bone fragments from every part of a human skeleton.
Wow.
Police then moved forward as if they had found Teresa Halbach. One mistake police did admit they made was not taking photos of the open burn pit before they had began sifting through it. Truthers, of course, used this as evidence of tampering because police didn't take those photos. However, when the police returned, they did take photos, so, this does look bad overall, I guess. Avery told reporters that the bone fragments were probably from sheep bones because his family had sheep at one point that may have been buried there or kept there or whatever it was he said. There is also the theory, Making a Murderer put out, that suggested Teresa might have been burned elsewhere and moved to the Avery fire pit to frame Stephen Avery. Small skull and bone fragments were intermingled with wires from tires, which fits what Avery and Brandon claimed they threw on a fire.
Right.
You have no idea, how hard it would be if you were going to frame someone to take a bone fragment and melt it with the radial belts of a tire.
Right. It's so specific.
Yeah, there's no way you're pulling that off. It just doesn't make sense. The burn pit was so full of smaller fragments of bones, but the burn barrel had larger sized pieces. It makes more sense that Teresa was cremated at the burn pit, and then the larger, more obvious pieces were taken out, presumably to be broken down further, and the smaller ones were either missed or assumed they would go unnoticed.
Mm-hmm.
One of the larger pieces of bone found had charred muscle on it, and there was a partial DNA match to Teresa. The partial DNA match was that 7 of the 15 markers, or whatever they're called, matched, but the other 8 were inconclusive and not present due to the burning.
Right, yeah, fire fucks up DNA.
So one expert pointed out that using the population of the world in 2005, when all this happened, there would have only been 7 people on the planet that could have matched those 7 markers. Now,
oh, well.
Right, and
That's
realistically...
an intense number.
Right, and realistically, how many of them would have been in Manitowoc, Wisconsin? Not that many.
Right. Well, they would have been her relatives, most likely.
Most likely, yeah, that's true too. So maybe all 7 of them could have been in that area.
Right.
Now, I do need to give a trigger warning on this next part because it's fucking awful. Convicting a Murderer plays a truly despicable recording of Avery talking to family members about the muscle tissue that was found on the bone, and Avery said, quote, "Muscle? From what? Her cunt?" Unquote.
What?
Yep.
Oh my God.
Fuck it. I can't even imagine. I just can't.
I'm speechless. Like,
Yeah. What? Yeah. When I saw that, because it's like in a record, I just couldn't. Yeah, but I couldn't leave it out either because it shows just how despicable this man is. And I'm sorry that I had to say that word out loud. It's not a word I ever use. Brandon told police that Avery used tools, a rake and a shovel, found near the burn pit to smash the bones and scatter them around. Brandon told police that Avery told him he had moved some of the bones to the quarry to help hide them. Again, that's why the dog is over there. During the trial, the bones at the quarry were not yet determined to have been human, so of course the defense used that to their advantage as much as they could.
mm-hmm.
It wasn't until Making a Murderer that it was released that the human bones were found in multiple locations at the trial, which fit what Brandon had told police, which debunks the idea that someone was trying to frame Avery, because why spread bones out so much if you wanted to frame one person? And realistically, why not just leave the body in the backyard?
Right.
Dr. Eisenberg stated that based on her experience and the number of bone fragments found in the burn pit, it was highly likely that this is where the body was burned. It is important to remember that the scent dog would not have alerted on the nearby berm if a body had not been burned in that area, carrying the scent throughout the whole area.
Mm-hmm.
There were also small metal rivets from a pair of jeans in the burn pit, demonstrating that there was burned clothing in there.
Right.
And Making a Murderer left out that Brandon confessed to burning Teresa's clothes and, right where the rivets were found. And Making a Murderer also left out there was evidence of Teresa's tooth fragments and how a dental expert was able to match it up to her dental records. So all this bullshit that, maybe it's not her is garbage.
Right. So it's definitely her body. I guess they can still claim that it was planted, but it's definitely her body.
Correct. And they're going to make those claims. And that is where we're going to end part 2 for the week. Don't hate me.
Damn, I'm frustrated.
There is so much that goes into this, and it's so convoluted.
Yeah, we still have to discuss some of the other things that happened during the investigation. We have to talk about Brandon Dassey's confession. And
I'm really interested to hear about what made him confess.
It's honestly, this is another heartbreaking part of the whole case. And that's why I was like, I'm going to give him his own side here. Like, we talked about Stephen Avery. We've now talked about Teresa and the crime scene. And now we're going to talk about other parts, but I wanted to give Brandon his own section because he kind of deserves it. Even though he's still a fucking scumbag too, he was manipulated by a really shitty uncle.
Well.
Yeah, well, you'll find out next week.
Yeah, I guess we'll just have to wait. I mean, I'm really interested to hear what happens next.
It's yeah, so it's crazy. We have not done a 3-parter before, so the whole thing is weird to all of us. So this is cool.
Yeah, these cliffhangers, I'm not used to it.
Maybe I'll have to incorporate that more.
Yeah. Oh, just to torture us.
Just to torture you.
Oh, great.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. We'll see you again soon. I am Janus Dead.
I'm Jameson Dead.
And I'm Joyous Dead.
And we'll see you next week.
Bye.